Shalom. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Ehya Asher Ehya, or as it's often translated, I am who I am, or I am that I am, as found in Exodus 3 verse 14. But we're going to look at it in context with the verse before it and the verse after it, because there's some interesting clues here about the character and the name of Yahweh. And that is what we're going to be examining here. So to begin, let's look at Exodus chapter 3 verse 13. And Moshe said to the Elohim, "Look, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, Elohim of your fathers sent me to you. And they will say to me, what is his name? What will I say?" So here we can see in this verse that Moshe wants to know the name of the Elohim that he is meeting with so that he can tell them who he is. Now let's take a look at verse 14. And Elohim said to Moshe, Ehya Asher Ehya. We're going to come back to this and we'll take a look at this phrase here in a little while, but let's continue on. And he said, thus you will say to the sons of Israel, Ehya sent me to you. The name Elohim gives to Moshe is Ehya. Interesting that we always hear Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahweh, Jehovah, etc. But you don't very often hear people say that his name is Ehya. And yet right here in verse 14 it says that his name is Ehya. Now let's take a look at the root of this word Ehya, and that's the He Yod He, or Haya. We're going to conjugate this verb. First person is Ehya. Ehya means I exist. Now the verb Haya literally means to exist, but we can also translate it with the verb to be in English. In fact, most of the time it is translated with the verb to be. In this case, I am. And as an example, you can see the word Ehya used in Exodus 4 verse 12. The second person would be Tihya. That means you exist, or you are. And an example of this word can be found in Exodus 4 verse 16, if you want to look these up. Then in the third person is Yihyeh. He exists, or he is. An example is also found in Exodus 4 verse 16. So now let's take a look at Ehya. That's the first person, I exist. We could also translate that as I will exist. One of the differences between Hebrew, or biblical Hebrew, and English is that biblical Hebrew only has two tenses: perfect tense, imperfect tense. Now the Ehya is imperfect tense, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here about the perfect and imperfect, but understand that perfect tense means completed action, imperfect tense means incomplete action. These tenses are related to action. The Hebrew language is a very action language. It's related to function, action, these concrete concepts. Now the English tenses are past, present, and future, and they're related to time. So recognize that when we translate a Hebrew verb, when we translate it into English, we have to convert a verb whose tense is related to action and convert it into an English verb that's related to time. Now, this doesn't always work well, and this is one of the problems with translations. When you're reading the Bible in Hebrew and you understand these concepts, the translation problem doesn't exist because you're thinking in Hebrew and not in English. But for the sake of our study here, we're going to have to convert this Hebrew verb into an English verb. Now the imperfect tense, as I said, is incomplete action. Now that may be an action that has already started but is not yet finished, or it may be an action that has not even started yet. So ehya as an imperfect can be translated as I exist, that's the English present tense, or I will exist, the English future tense. We could also translate that as I am, using the verb to be. Now, let's take a look at that phrase that we saw in verse 14. Ehya asher ehya. Here we have the word ehya and then the word asher. Asher is the relative pronoun. It can be translated as which, who, what, because. It depends on the context of how this is used and how we're going to translate it. We could translate that as I will exist because I will exist. I exist because I exist. I am who I am. We could also translate this as I will be who I will be, or I am that which exists. When a translator is translating the text, he has to decide what that best translation is to put in the text. In other words, he would choose from like one of these five, and there's also other choices as well. He would choose one of these and then put that into the text. However, because the Hebrew language is so dynamic, it's not which one of these five is the best translation of the text. In fact, all five of these convey the idea in ehya asher ehya. That's how dynamic the Hebrew language is. You really cannot translate one Hebrew word with one English word and convey the entire meaning of the Hebrew. In fact, it would even be better to translate one Hebrew word with an entire sentence in English, because of the richness of the Hebrew language. So don't look at these five to say which one you think best fits the idea in this verse. Instead, recognize that all of this encompasses the meaning of ehya asher ehya. Now let's take a look at the next verse. Verse 15. And Elohim said again to Moshe, Thus you will say to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, Elohim of your fathers, Elohim of Avraham, Elohim of Yitzchak, and Elohim of Yaakov sent me to you. This is my name for a long time, and this is my memorial for generation and generation. Elohim again gives his name to Moshe, but this time it is Yahweh. The two names, Yahweh and ehya, are related. Here's the verb haya, again, which we discussed earlier, and here's the Hebrew verb hawa, he, wa, he. Let's take a look at this verb hawa. It is virtually identical in meaning and use as the verb haya. The first person is ehwa, and that means I exist or I am. The second person, tihwa, you exist or you are. And the third person, yihweh, he exists or he is. Do you notice here that the third person of the verb hawa is spelled yod, he, vav, he? Remember, all Hebrew names are words with meaning. Therefore, names like Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Jehovah, etc. mean nothing in Hebrew, because none of these words are Hebrew words. They mean nothing in the Hebrew language. So, in my opinion, the pronunciation of the name Yod-He Vav-He is Yihweh. I should point out why I use the W rather than a V for the letter Vav. In modern Hebrew, the sixth letter of the alphabet is the letter Vav, which has a V sound. However, it can also take on the O or the U vowel sounds. There is some controversy over this, in that there are those who believe that in ancient times this letter was the letter Wa and had a W sound along with the O and the U. Personally, I believe that it was a Wa, a W sound. And there's evidence for this. One of those is that 4 of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet doubled as consonants and vowels. These are the Aleph, the He, the Wa, and the Yod. The Yod, for example, can be the consonant Y or the vowel I or E. Notice that the Y and the E are very similar in sound. In the same way, the Wa or W is similar to O and U. Another piece of evidence is that Arabic, which is almost identical to Hebrew in its alphabet, does not have a Vav, it has a Wa, and it's pronounced with a W. It's possible that the V sound may have come from a Germanic European influence. So rather than Yihweh, it would be Yihweh. However, I do not believe that the focus should be on how the name is pronounced, but instead on what that name means. Let's take a look at Exodus 20 verse 7 from the King James Version. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. We've had many people interpret this verse many different ways, but in my opinion, looking at this Hebraically, literally what this verse is saying, you shall not lift up the character of Yahweh falsely. What I believe this verse is saying, that we are the representatives of Yahweh. We take his character, the Hebrew word for name, Shem, means character, and place it within us. Now, as his representatives, if we go out and lie, steal, or cheat, we're now representing his character falsely. Another verse is Numbers 6:27. And they, the Kohanim, the priests, shall put my name upon the children of Israel. Now, at first glance here, this really doesn't make a lot of sense, because how do you put a name on a people? Are they supposed to write this on them? But we have to understand that the Hebrews wrote very concretely. They used concepts that you can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. So what this is talking about is taking the character of Yahweh and giving it to the people. Interestingly, this verse comes right after the Aaronic blessing. And the Aaronic blessing describes the entire character of Yahweh. Then the Kohanim are supposed to take this character, which is the name, not just a name like 4 letters, but the character of Yahweh, and teach it to the people, so that they now have the character of Yahweh within them. In summary, these 3 verses that we looked at, Exodus chapter 3 verses 13 to 15, we see the Ehya Asher Ehya. We looked at that from a Hebraic perspective on what that phrase means, but then we also recognize that Yahweh has 2 names. Ehya, which means I exist, I will exist, I am. And also Yihweh, which means he exists, he will exist, he is. And both of these names are related to each other. Both of these names are conveying the idea that Yahweh is the existing one. One thing that we must keep in mind, in the ancient Hebrew thought, only that which can be experienced exists. One of the major differences between Hebrew thought and Greek thought is that Hebrew thought only concerns itself with that which you know, that which you can see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. Greek thought, on the other hand, goes beyond that, the abstract. What is out there that I have not experienced? Sciences are developed out of Greek thought. Hebrew thought cannot develop the sciences because of its way of thinking. Israel in Egypt had not experienced Yahweh, therefore to them he did not exist. So Moshe's question to Elohim is, they're going to ask me who you are. What am I going to tell them? What is your name? What is your character? And his response is, I am the one who exists because I am the one who exists.